6 days after I buried my only son, a lawyer handed his widow $5 million and handed me a set of car keys. She dropped those keys on the table in front of me the way a person drops a coin into a beggar's cup. She leaned close enough that I could smell her perfume, and she whispered that the car was old, just like me, and that I should keep it as a souvenir. I took the keys. I walked out into the November rain. I climbed into that scratched gray SUV in the far corner of the parking lot, and I turned the ignition, and before I could put my foot on the accelerator, the dashboard flickered, the speakers crackled, and my dead son's voice filled the cabin. "Dad, if you are hearing this, it means I am dead, or it means people believe I am dead. Do not trust Renee. Follow the coordinates." Then the navigation screen lit up by itself with a set of numbers I had never entered, pointing to an address on the far edge of the city that my daughter-in-law had spent a great deal of money making sure I would never see. Before we go any further, do me one small favor. Leave a comment with the number 1 so I know you are riding along with me tonight, and hit that like button if you believe that the truth deserves to be heard even when it arrives late. Pour yourself something to drink, get comfortable, and remember as you listen that every single person in this story had 100 chances to do the right thing. They simply kept choosing wrong. My name is Walter Grady. I am 68 years old, and I have spent 51 of those years with my hands inside engines. I understand machines. I understand that a machine never fails all at once. It fails in whispers first. A bearing that runs a half-degree warm. A gasket that weeps 1 drop of oil a week. A vibration at 40 miles an hour that was not there last spring. Any fool can hear an engine when it finally screams. The skill is in hearing it when it only sighs. I spent my whole life listening for those sighs in steel. I never once thought to listen for them in my own family. The lawyer's office smelled of expensive leather and cold air conditioning even in November. I sat in a chair that cost more than my first house payment, with my hands folded in my lap. 51 years of grease had settled permanently into the creases of my knuckles. No soap on earth takes it out. It becomes part of the skin, a kind of tattoo that says this man worked. Across the table sat Renee Ashford, my son's wife, 6 days a widow, and her nails were painted a bright arterial red, and her makeup was flawless, and there was not one thing in her face that had cracked. Not one. I had watched women grieve before. I watched my own mother grieve. Grief does something to the architecture of a face. It pulls the mouth down at the corners in a way no person can control. It leaves the eyes swollen and rimmed and stupid with exhaustion. Renee's face had none of that. Her face was a wall that had been recently repainted. The lawyer read the will in a flat voice, like a man reading serial numbers off a shipping manifest. Renee received the house in the hills, $1.2 million of brick and glass and imported cedar. She received the investment accounts. She received the patents, which were the actual fortune, the ones Nathan had built out of nothing at a workbench in my garage when he was 19 years old. Total value north of $5 million. I sat very still and let it wash over me, because none of it had ever been mine, and none of it had ever mattered to me. What mattered was already in a box in the ground at Riverside Cemetery. Then the lawyer looked up at me over the top of his glasses, and I could see he was uncomfortable. And I understood that whatever came next was going to be small. To Walter Grady, my father, I leave my 2018 Ford Explorer. That was it. That was the sentence. 111,000 miles on the odometer. A scratch down the passenger door from a mailbox in Akron, and a heater that only worked on the highest setting. Renee smiled. It was not a smile that involved her eyes. It was something her mouth did while her eyes stayed cold and busy, calculating, already 3 moves ahead. She stood up, and her heels struck the hardwood floor with a sound I will remember until the day they put me under the ground, a sound like nails being driven into a lid. She dropped the keys. She leaned down. She said her piece about the car being old, just like me, and then she walked out. Here is the thing about pain when you get to be my age. When you are young, pain comes out of you. You shout, you break something, you drive too fast. When you are old, pain goes in, it compresses, it settles into your chest like wet concrete poured into a form, and then it begins to cure and it gets harder every hour, and there is nothing anybody can do about it afterward. I said nothing at all. I picked up the keys off that polished table with a hand that shook slightly, and I nodded at the lawyer, and I walked out into the parking lot. The Explorer sat in the far corner under a sodium light, taking on rain. Gray, dull, honest. I opened the door and the smell came out to meet me. and it nearly took my legs out from under me. Old leather and machine grease, and underneath both, faintly, the vanilla air freshener Margaret used to buy by the case, 'cause she said it made every vehicle smell like a bakery. Margaret, my wife, 40 years. This was the truck Nathan drove when he was 24 years old, and starting out with nothing, when he still came over on Sundays with a bag of hardware and a problem he wanted to think through out loud in my garage. Margaret would bring us coffee and stand in the doorway with her arms folded and pretend to be annoyed that we were talking about torque values instead of eating. She had been dead 4 years. Sudden heart failure, the doctors said. A winter night. I found her in her chair with her reading glasses still on. 4 years I had carried the weight of that. The certainty that I had missed something, that a man who could hear a bearing go bad from across a shop had somehow failed to hear his own wife's heart giving out beside him every night for months. I sat in that truck in the rain and put the key in and turned it, and the engine caught on the first crank the way a well-kept engine does. And then the dash flickered. Not the ordinary flicker of a tired alternator. I know that flicker. This was something else, something deliberate, a cascade that ran left to right across the instrument cluster like a hand passing over it. The speakers popped. The navigation screen, which had been black, came alive with a line of red text and a string of coordinates, and then the voice message played. When my son's voice cut off, the silence that came after it was the loudest thing I have ever heard in my life. Only the rain on the roof. Tap, tap, tap on the sheet metal. The same rain that had been falling on Cleveland for 9 days straight. I sat there with both hands locked on the wheel and my knuckles gone white, and my heart slamming against my ribs like a piston with a broken valve, and I stared at those red coordinates burning on the screen. It was not a glitch. I want to be very clear about that, because I turned it over 100 times in the next 30 seconds. My son wrote software the way I rebuild carburetors, obsessively, repeatedly. He did not permit himself errors. If that message played, it played because he had built it to play, and he had built it to play for exactly one person, and that person was sitting in the driver's seat with rain on his coat. The cold came through the window seals and through my coat, and settled in the old iron pin they put in my hip in 1984. My eyes blurred and then cleared, and the thing in my chest that had been grief for 6 days turned over and became something with a much higher operating temperature. I put it in gear. The tires bit into the wet asphalt, and I pulled out of that lot, and I did not go home. I drove to Parma. The industrial district out there is a graveyard. It used to be the beating heart of everything, back when this city built things, back when a man could walk out of high school on a Friday and be on a line by Monday morning with a paycheck that bought a house. Now it is rows of gray brick carcasses with the windows punched out and weeds coming up through the loading docks. Fog had settled into the low ground between the buildings. The few streetlights that still worked cast a sick yellow light that did not reach the pavement. The navigation walked me in turn by turn and stopped me in front of a warehouse with no number on it. The roll-up door was rusted through in 3 places. I shut off the engine and sat listening to the rain and the ticking of hot metal. I got out. My legs were not good that night. They have not been good for a while. I walked through puddles I could not see the bottom of, and the wind came howling down between those buildings with a sound I do not care to hear again. Beside the old mechanical lock on that door there was something new. An electronic keypad mounted clean and square, its backlight glowing a steady green. Somebody had installed it recently, and installed it well. I stood there in the rain with my hand hovering over it. Nathan never used random passwords. He used numbers that meant something, and he used them badly, the way brilliant people are often careless about small things. His mother's birthday, the displacement of the first engine we rebuilt together. I keyed in 714, my birthday. The keypad chirped. The light went green. Inside the door, a chain moved with a long scraping sound. I got my hands under the door and hauled it up, and my shoulder complained, and it went up. Dust and the heavy sweet smell of motor oil rolled out over me, pitch black inside. I felt along the wall until I found the switch panel, and the fluorescent tubes buzzed and stuttered, and flooded the place with hard white light. That warehouse was not abandoned. It was immaculate. The floor had been swept. There was a rolling tool chest against the near wall, a good one, the same brand I have used my whole life. And in the center of the floor, under a black tarp, was the unmistakable shape of a full-size vehicle. I walked to it slowly. My hand shook when I took hold of the tarp. I pulled it down. A jet black Ford Explorer stood there under the lights. Not a mark on it. The paint was so clean, it held the reflection of the ceiling fixtures like still water. It was my son's truck, the one he had been driving on the night of the accident. The one that was supposed to have gone off the guardrail on the ravine road and burned down to a shell with him inside it. I stood absolutely still and let my mind do what a mechanic's mind does, which is stop feeling and start indexing. If this vehicle was here, undamaged, dry, under a tarp in a locked building in Parma, then something else had burned at the bottom of that ravine, and somebody else had been inside it. I put my palm flat on the hood. The metal was cold, and there was not one dent in it, and there was not one blister in the clear coat, and the tires still had the little rubber nubs on the sidewall that come off in the first 100 miles. 6 days earlier, a police officer had stood in my kitchen, with his hat in his hands, and told me my son's remains were not viewable. It had been a stage set, a very good one, built by somebody who knew exactly what the investigators would look for, and exactly what they would not. My heart was hammering, and my hands had gone very steady, the way they always do when the diagnosis finally comes clear. Nathan was alive. Or, at the very least, Nathan had known exactly what was coming, and had built himself a door out of it. I walked around the truck. The driver's door was unlocked. I opened it and got in, and the cabin smelled like good leather and like him, and I had to sit there a moment with my eyes closed. On the passenger seat was a small steel box, with a greased thumbprint on the lid. My son could not touch a clean surface without leaving evidence that he had been working. Margaret used to threaten to bill him for laundry. Inside the box were a tablet and a spare key fob. The tablet screen came up on its own, found my face in the dark, and printed 2 words across the glass. "Hello, Dad." There was one video file. I touched it. Nathan appeared, and it hurt to look at him. He was gaunt. He had not been sleeping. There were shadows under his eyes and 3 days of beard on his jaw. And he was sitting in a dark room somewhere with a work light behind him. "Dad," he said, "if you are watching this, my plan has moved into the second phase. I am sorry I kept this from you. I had to. Keeping you out of it was the only way to keep you alive." I held my breath. The fluorescent lights buzzed over the empty warehouse. 3 months ago, I found that the brake lines on my truck had been worked on. Not failed, worked on. Somebody wanted me dead and wanted it to look like a Tuesday. He stopped. He rubbed his face with both hands, and when he took them away, his expression was the worst thing I had seen in 6 days. So I started monitoring the house. Cameras I had installed myself 3 years ago for security. I turned them inward. "Dad, Renee never loved me. Not for one day. She has been seeing Dr. Nolan Whitfield for 2.5 years. And they do not simply want me in a box. They want the $4.8 million payout on the life policy she took out on me 18 months ago. There is an accidental death rider on it. It pays double if I die in a crash. Something went through my chest like a wrench swung sideways into the ribs. I switched vehicles," Nathan said. "I staged the wreck using a same-year, same-model truck I bought at auction in Indiana and an unclaimed body out of the morgue at Lakeshore Surgical Center. Whitfield has admitting privileges there and full access to the medical record system. He is the one who altered the dental chart on file so it would match what they found. He built the identification himself, Dad. He did not know I was watching him do it. That is the piece that puts a needle through both of them, and it is on the drive." The video paused for a second while he gathered himself, and then his face changed. It got older, but that is not all of it. "Plug the external drive into this tablet." Renee did not start with me. My hands had begun to shake before I even picked up the drive. Some part of me already knew. Some part of me had known for 4 years and had not had the courage to say it out loud in an empty house. I plugged it in. A directory opened. Audio files, image files, scanned documents, arranged with the ruthless order my son brought to everything. The first folder was labeled with one word, Margaret. I sat down on the running board of that black truck because my legs would not hold me. I opened the first audio file, and my wife spoke to me for the first time in 4 years. Her voice was thin. It was the voice of someone talking into a phone late at night when they are too tired to sit up. "Walter, I am tired again today. My chest is tight." Renee's tea tasted strange again, bitter underneath. She says it is an herbal blend that will help me sleep. There was a rustle of fabric. Then the recording ended. I do not know how long I sat on that running board with the tablet in my lap. 40 years. I met Margaret Doyle in 1978 at a diner on Loron Avenue, where she was working the counter to pay for nursing school she never finished, because we got married instead, and then Nathan came along instead. She had a laugh that came out of her in one burst, like something startled out of a hedge. She read 3 books a week. She could not cook worth a damn, and she knew it, and she did it anyway for 4 decades, and I ate every bit of it. For 38 years, she made the tea in our house. Then, in the last 8 months of her life, she stopped, because our daughter-in-law had become so very attentive. Renee came by every afternoon. Renee sat with her. Renee brought her the tin of Earl Grey and made the pot and carried the cup to her chair by the window. And Margaret told me on the phone, delighted, that she felt like she had finally gotten the daughter she never had. I remember being grateful. I remember standing in my shop with a cracked block on the stand and feeling grateful to that woman. The night Margaret died, I came home at 7:15. She was in her chair with a book face down on her knee, and her glasses still on and the cup on the side table beside her, half full and long cold. The cardiologist used the phrase sudden cardiac event. Nobody ordered a toxicology screen, because there was no reason on this earth to order one for a 62-year-old woman with a history of high blood pressure who died at home in her chair. I buried her on a Thursday with snow coming down, and I went home to a house that has been too quiet ever since. And for 4 years I performed the only ritual I knew, which was to blame myself. I told myself that a man who could hear a valve tick from across a shop had failed to hear his own wife dying beside him for 8 months. Now every gear in that terrible little machine dropped into mesh, and the truth turned over and it ran. The tablet advanced to the next video on its own. Nathan again. His voice had hardened into something I had never heard from my son. Dad, I know exactly what you were thinking right now, and I need you to keep breathing. I found that recording in Mom's dresser 2 years ago, in the drawer where she kept her mother's rosary. I did not want to believe it either. So I went out to the old house, and I found the tin, and there was still residue in the bottom of it, and I paid an independent lab in Columbus $1,100 to run it. He held a document up to the camera. A yellowed sheet with a lab letterhead I could not read at that resolution. Mom did not have a cardiac event. She was poisoned. Low-dose arsenic compound administered in the tea over a period of roughly 8 months. Slow enough that every symptom reads as ordinary decline in a woman her age. Fatigue, nausea, tingling in the hands, blurred vision, cardiac stress at the end. And the person who made her tea every single afternoon for 8 months, Dad, was Renee. Something exploded behind my sternum. My blood came up hot. The smell of oil and grease in that warehouse, the smell that has been my comfort in my church my entire adult life, did nothing for me at all. 4 years. I had sat across a Thanksgiving table from the woman who murdered my wife. I had carved for her. I had asked after her mother. I had let her put her hand on my arm at Margaret's graveside and tell me that Margaret was at peace now. Nathan kept talking, and I made myself listen. Renee did not marry into this family because of me, he said. She married a projected earnings curve. I have her browser history from the 8 months before we met. She researched me. She researched the patent filings. She researched what a surviving spouse inherits in Ohio when there is no prenuptial agreement. He paused and looked directly into the lens, and for a second, it was like he was looking into my eyes across that warehouse. I staged the accident so they would believe they had won. Because people who believe they have won stop being careful. They move money, they file claims, they talk to each other out loud in rooms they think are safe. That is the only window there is, Dad, and it is not open for long. He held up a small black memory card between 2 fingers. Everything I could not get remotely is on a duplicate of this. Transfer records, the altered chart from Lakeshore, recorded calls. She keeps it in the safe in her study at the house. Behind the painting on the north wall, there is a recessed panel. The painting slides. It is not a wall safe, it is a compartment, and it is not on the alarm circuit, because putting it on the circuit would have meant putting it on a permit. I cannot go get it. Whitfield has people looking for this truck, and the police are looking for a dead man's vehicle. And if I surface before the claim is filed, then everything I did was for nothing, and Mom stays a woman who died of a heart attack forever. You are the only person who can walk into that house, Dad. But Renee changed every code in it the day after the funeral. Then a line of text came up on the screen after his face faded. Contact Rosa. She still has the passage key. I sat in that warehouse for a long time with the tablet gone dark in my lap. I want to tell you the truth about what happened in me during those minutes, because I think it matters more than any of the rest of it. I thought about killing her. I am not proud of that, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. I am a man who has spent his life around tools that can take a hand off, and I knew where she slept, and there was a part of me sitting on that running board that did the arithmetic and found it acceptable. I could feel it in my forearms. That is how close it was. What stopped me was not virtue. I want to be honest with you. It was Margaret, because I could see exactly what she would have said. She would have looked at me over the top of her glasses in the way she had, and she would have said, "Walter Grady, if you do that, then the story ends with you in a cell, and that woman being called a victim at your trial. And nobody ever says my name out loud again." That was it. That was the whole argument, and it took about 9 seconds, and it settled the rest of my life. Revenge, the kind you take with your hands, is the cheapest thing in the world. Anybody can do it. It requires nothing but a bad hour. What Renee Ashford had actually taken from my wife was not her life alone. It was her name. Margaret Grady was going to be, forever, a woman with high blood pressure who died in a chair. Nobody was ever going to say the word murder over her. So I was not going to kill anybody. I was going to do the harder thing, which was to build the case so tight, so heavy, so bolted down at every joint, that no attorney in the state of Ohio could shake one piece loose. I was going to make 12 strangers in a jury box say her name out loud. I got up off that running board. My knees cracked. I put the tablet inside my coat against my chest, and I pulled the warehouse door down behind me, and I keyed the lock. The rain in Parma had gotten worse. I did not feel it. I got into the old gray SUV, the piece of junk she had thrown at me across a table, and I turned the key, and the engine came up smooth, and the navigation screen flickered and drew a new destination on the map without being asked. $1.2 million of house on a hill, where my daughter-in-law was celebrating. But I did not go that night. I want to say that I turned the truck toward the hills right then. That rage carried me straight up that driveway in the dark. That is how it would go in a movie. In a movie, the old man goes tonight. I have been taking machines apart for 51 years, and the single most expensive mistake in the trade is doing the work angry. Angry hands strip threads. Angry hands crack housings that would have come free with heat in 10 more minutes of patience. I have watched good mechanics destroy a $2,000 transmission because they could not stand to wait for a bolt to soak. So I drove home to the little house on Wexford Street, where Margaret and I raised our son, and I sat at the kitchen table in my wet coat until 3 in the morning, and I did not sleep. In the morning I drove out to Riverside Cemetery. My wife and my son are buried 11 feet apart. Her stone has been there 4 years, and the granite has begun to gray at the edges. His was so new the earth over it had not settled, and there were still florist stakes stuck in the mud. I stood there in the wet grass with my hat in my hands, and I told them both what I had found. Out loud. I am aware of how that sounds. I did it anyway. Then I said something to Margaret that I had not been able to say at her funeral, which was that I was sorry, and that I had been listening the whole time, and that the reason I never heard it was that a person cannot hear a sound they have decided in advance is impossible. That is the part that will follow me. Not that I missed it. That I could not have caught it, because catching it would have required me to look at a young woman who brought my wife tea every afternoon and ask myself what she wanted. I called Rosa Delgado from the cemetery parking lot. Rosa kept house for Nathan and Renee for 10 years, from before there was a Renee. She raised 4 children of her own on that paycheck. Margaret used to send her home with tomatoes every August, whether she wanted them or not. Renee let her go the day after the funeral, 1 week's severance and a form to sign. We met at a diner on Pearl Road with a laminated menu and coffee that had been on the burner since dawn. Rosa is a small woman with iron-gray hair and hands as ruined as mine, and when she sat down across from me, her chin was already trembling. I told her enough, not all of it, enough. She was quiet for a long moment, turning her cup on the saucer. "Mr. Grady," she said, "I want to tell you something, and I need you to let me finish before you say anything." Then she told me. She said that 4 years ago, in the last months of Margaret's life, she had watched Renee prepare that tea in the kitchen of that house perhaps 30 times. And that twice, Renee had taken the cup into the pantry alone before carrying it out to the sunroom. She said she had noticed it. She said she had thought it was strange. She said she had told herself it was nothing. Because what else could it possibly be? And because she was a 59-year-old housekeeper, without papers for her sister who lived with her, and because the woman she would have had to accuse had the power to end her employment with one phone call. She said, "I have carried that for 4 years, and I did not know what I was carrying until right now, and I do not know if I will ever put it down." I reached across that table and took her hand in mine, and I told her the truest thing I know, which is that the people who set the trap are the ones who bear the weight of it, and that the rest of us are only doing arithmetic in the dark, with half the numbers missing. She cried for a while. Then she wiped her face with a paper napkin and reached into her purse and put a brass key on the table between the sugar caddy and the salt. "The service passage," she said. "From the side garden into the back hall. It is a mechanical lock." She never changed it because she never once in 3 years walked through the servant's door. Before I stood up to go, Rosa said one more thing, and I have thought about it more than almost anything else in this story. She said, "Mr. Grady, I do not want you to think I am making excuses for her. I am not. But you should know who you are dealing with, and she is not what you think she is." Renee grew up in a rented duplex in East Toledo. Her father left when she was 6. Her mother worked doubles at a laundry and still lost the house twice. And the second time they moved everything they owned in one trip in a borrowed pickup. Rosa had it from Renee herself, told once late after most of a bottle of wine in a kitchen at Christmas. Renee told Rosa that the worst thing that ever happened to her was not the poverty. It was standing on a sidewalk at 11 years old, watching a man she had never met carry her mother's sewing machine out of the front door, and understanding that there was no one on earth who was going to stop him. She told Rosa she promised herself that night that she would never in her life be a person that something could simply be taken from. I have turned that over 100 times since, because here is what it does not do. It does not make her less guilty. Not by 1 gram. Half the people I have known came up hard. Sal Petrosky came up harder than that, and he has never taken a dime that was not his. My own father drank the rent money more than once, and I did not grow up to poison anybody's tea. But it does explain the shape of the machine. Every mechanism has a design intent, and if you understand the intent, you can predict the failure. Renee Ashford had built her entire self around one principle, which was that security is a quantity, and you obtain the quantity, and then no one can ever come through your door and carry your mother's sewing machine out into the street again. And a person who believes that will always need more, because there is no number that makes you safe. There is no number. She could have had 5 million, and she would have needed 9. And if she had 9, she would have needed 20. And every human being standing between her and the next number would begin to look, eventually, like a man walking out of her house with a sewing machine. That is what she saw when she looked at my wife. Not a woman in a chair by the window. An obstacle with a heartbeat. And knowing that, understanding it all the way down, I still intended to put her in a state prison for the rest of her natural life, because understanding why a machine fails is not a reason to let it keep running. I went to see my friend Sal Petrosky that afternoon. Sal is 65. His hair went white at 40, and his hands have been black since Carter was president. He has owned the shop out on the West Edge for 31 years, and we have been friends since we were both 19 and stupid. And there is not one thing on this earth I would not tell that man. He looked up from a Silverado on the lift when I came through the bay door, and he pushed his safety glasses onto his forehead, and he started to say the thing people say about Nathan. I put the tablet on the workbench and said, "Sal, sit down and put your phone in the drawer." 20 minutes later, he was still sitting on an upturned milk crate with his hands over his mouth. Then he got up, and he went to the back of the shop, and he started pulling boxes off a shelf, and he said the only thing he said for the next hour, which was all right. That night I did not sleep either. I went into the garage at midnight, and I put an old 3-speed transmission on the bench, and I took it down to the last bearing and laid every part in order on a shop rag. The way my father taught me, the way I taught Nathan. It is what I do instead of praying. At 11 o'clock the next night, I drove up into the hills. I left the SUV 200 yards down the street under a stand of oaks, where the streetlight was out. The house stood up on its rise with half the windows lit, 3 stories of glass and imported cedar. My son designed the south elevation himself on a legal pad at my kitchen table, and when the framing went up, he called me at 6 in the morning to tell me the roofline had come out exactly the way he drew it. Now it looked like what it was. A very expensive trap with the jaws propped open. I went around through the side garden in the dark. My coat was soaked through in 90 seconds. Rosa was waiting at the service passage door, with her arms wrapped around herself and fear moving across her face in the security light. She had not needed to come. I had told her not to come. She came anyway. "They are downstairs," she whispered. "She called Dr. Whitfield an hour ago. He is still here. The staff is gone," I said. "Go home, Rosa." She said, "I will be in my car at the bottom of the hill until your truck moves." I turned the brass key and went in. The back hall was dark and warm and smelled of cedar. There was music coming from the living room, something orchestral, low. I moved along that hallway on carpet an inch thick, and I thought about how my son used to complain that this house was so quiet it made his ears ring. At the corner by the stairs I stopped, because I could hear her. Renee's voice, perfectly clear, perfectly relaxed. The claim went in Tuesday. There is a contestability review because the policy is under 2 years, but the accident finding is on file and the identification is closed. 45 days and the 4.8 is in the account. Then Whitfield, that low, easy laugh of his, the one he used on patients. The chart matched. It was always going to match. And the old man does not have a clue in the world. He was in that lawyer's office holding those keys like a kid at Christmas. My fist closed. The tendon stood up on the back of my hand. I want to tell you what it takes to stand in the dark 11 feet from the 2 people who murdered your wife and your grandchildren's chances, and to do absolutely nothing about it. And the answer is that it takes everything a man has. Every ounce. The concrete in my chest went so hard it was difficult to draw a full breath. I went up the stairs. Her study was black and smelled of that perfume even with nobody in it. I did not turn on a light. I used my phone with my hand cupped over the lens. The painting on the north wall was an abstract thing in rust and gray that Nathan had bought her in Chicago. I got my fingers behind the left edge and lifted, and it moved on a track, and behind it was a recessed steel panel with a mirrored face, and behind that a compartment about the size of a shoebox. There was more in it than the memory card. There were 4 small glass vials with no labels on them, sitting in a foam block, and 2 of them were empty. And there was a black leather notebook. I knew that notebook. I had bought that notebook. I bought one every January at the drugstore, on Ridge Road for 30-some years, and Margaret wrote in it every night of her life. I had torn my own house apart looking for the last one after she died. I had decided I lost it in the move of her things. My hands were not steady. I opened it to the last written page. Her handwriting, which had been small and neat for 40 years, had gone crooked and heavy. The letters pressed too hard into the paper. The entry was dated 3 days before she died. I know Renee is putting something in my tea. My eyes get worse every day and my hands do not work right. And I am afraid of the stairs now. I cannot tell Walter. She told me if I say one word to him, she will make sure Nathan loses everything. And I believe her, and I am so tired. If I am wrong about this, then I am a foolish old woman, and no harm done. If I am not wrong, then somebody will find this book, and they will know that I was not confused. I was not confused. I stood in that dark room, and something in me came apart that has not gone back together since. My wife knew. For weeks, maybe months, she knew what was being done to her, and she drank it anyway. Because a young woman had made her believe that our son's life was the price of her speaking up. She died protecting him. She died protecting all of us, and I was in the garage. I put the notebook and the memory card inside my coat. I left the vials exactly where they sat, in the exact orientation. Because I already understood that 4 glass vials in a hidden compartment in her own house were worth more to me sitting untouched than they would ever be in my pocket. That is when I heard the heels on the hardwood in the hall. They came up the stairs at an easy pace. They came down the corridor and they stopped directly outside the study door. The handle began to turn. I did not think. There is a kind of speed that has nothing to do with youth, and it is the speed of a man who has spent his life around things that can crush him. And I was behind the double layer of velvet curtain beside the window before the latch cleared. The door opened. A long yellow blade of hallway light fell across the floor. Renee walked in wearing a black silk robe with a glass of red wine in her hand. She did not turn on the overhead. She crossed to the desk, and her heels struck like a clock counting down, and she stood not 4 feet from where I was standing, with my back against cold glass and rain on the other side of it. She picked up a folder. She opened it and turned 2 pages and made a small, satisfied sound in her throat. Then she took out her phone and said, "Are you finished down there, Nolan? Come up when you are. I want to celebrate." She turned. She walked out. The door closed. Her heels went away down the stairs. I stood behind that curtain for what felt like a very long time, and the sweat ran cold down my spine, and I counted to 200 before I moved. I could not go back the way I came in. They were both between me and that door now. I opened the study window. The November cold came in and hit me square in the face, and it was welcome. Below me was the brick roof of the first-floor porch, and running down the corner of it, a copper drain leader on iron standoffs. I am 68 years old, and there is a pin in my left hip. I went over the sill anyway. My hands found the brick ledge, and my boots found the porch roof. And I went down that leader hand over hand, and something in my shoulder gave a warning I chose to ignore, and my feet hit the soaked ground harder than I would have liked. I crossed the black garden. I went through the side gate. I walked 200 yards down that hill in the rain, like an old man out for a stroll, because a man who runs is a man somebody remembers. The gray SUV was waiting under the oaks. I got in and locked the doors and sat there breathing. Then I took out the tablet and put the memory card in. There was a great deal on it. Wire transfers moving money out of the estate accounts on the day of the funeral. The application for the policy, signed 18 months ago. The Lakeshore records with the revision history intact, showing a dental chart amended at 11:40 at night by a user credential belonging to Nolan Whitfield, 4 hours before the identification was made. And there was an audio file with one word for a name, Walter. I opened it. Whitfield first. Has the old man started asking questions? Then Renee, bored, the way you talk about a chore. No, he is a senile mechanic who thinks a will is a legal document instead of a piece of paper. But we should not let it sit. Once the payout clears, he becomes the only person alive with standing to contest anything. 2 weeks, and then we send him after his wife and his son. I turned the screen off. I sat in the dark with the rain on the roof, and I understood that I was not the survivor of this thing. I was the last item on a list. And that, more than anything else, is when I stopped being afraid. Because a man who is on the list already has nothing left to protect. He can walk right into the middle of it. I put the truck in gear and drove to Sal Petrosky's shop. 2 blocks down the hill, the navigation screen lit up on its own again, red, with an alert tone that cut through the cabin. Unauthorized access to vehicle telematics. They were pinging the truck. Somewhere in that house, one of them had opened the connected services account. The one that came with the vehicle from the factory. The one that is in the owner's name. And they were watching a little blue dot move down a hill in the rain, and wondering where a senile old mechanic was going at midnight. I smiled. I could feel it happen on my own face, and it was not a pleasant thing. Because my son had been in this truck's wiring for 3 months, and my son did not build anything he did not build twice. There was a blank button under the armrest, the kind of unmarked switch that comes in a bag of 10. I pressed it. The navigation screen blinked once and switched to a simulated position feed. From that moment on, anybody watching that account saw a 2018 Ford Explorer proceeding at reasonable speeds toward a small house on Wexford Street, arriving and shutting off for the night. The actual truck turned west toward the county line. Sal's shop had every light on. He had put a piece of cardboard over the window in the office door. There were 2 other men inside. The first was Victor Reyes, an independent investigator who works fraud referrals for a consortium of carriers. Gray suit, soaked through at the shoulders, a face like a closed door. 6 years ago, Victor spent 11 months building a case around a surgical group where Nolan Whitfield was a named partner. And 11 months of work came apart because a single custodian of records changed her story. Victor had never let go of it. Sal found him in 4 phone calls. The second was Frank Boone, a lieutenant with the city, in uniform, with rain still beating on his shoulders. Frank and I went through basic training together in 1976. He is the most rigid human being I have ever loved. He has never once in 50 years done a thing sideways, and I knew that about him going in, and that was precisely why I called him. The 4 of us stood around that workbench, under the drop light like men over an engine that will not start. Victor went through the drive twice, taking notes in a small book, saying nothing. Then he set his pen down. He said, "Walter, I am going to tell you the truth about what you have and what you do not have. What you have is extraordinary. The amended chart alone ends Whitfield's career and puts him in a federal courtroom. The transfers are clean. Your wife's journal is admissible, and it is devastating. But your wife's journal is her belief. The lab result your son paid for is on a tin from a house. Chain of custody unestablished, 4 years cold. A competent defense attorney puts the poisoning on Whitfield, gives the jury a woman who was manipulated by an older physician, and Renee Ashford walks out with 3 years for insurance fraud. There is no confession, and there is no body, because your wife was cremated. Nobody said anything. The compressor kicked on in the corner. Frank Boone said, "Then we need her to say it." Victor nodded, out loud, unprompted, in a place where a recording is lawful and a jury will believe it. I said, "One-party consent." Frank looked at me. I said, "I have been sitting in a shop with a radio on for 50 years, Frank. Ohio is a one-party state. If I am in the room and I consent, the recording is legal. It has been legal my whole adult life and half of yours." Frank Boone was quiet for a long moment. Then he said the thing I will owe him for as long as I live. He said, "I will not authorize it as an operation, Walter, because you are a civilian, and I would be putting a 68-year-old man in a room with 2 people who have already killed twice. But I cannot stop a man from consenting to a recording in his own house. And I can have 4 units 1,100 feet away with a live feed, for reasons entirely unrelated to you." Sal opened a case on the bench. 4 directional microphones, no bigger than a shirt button. "These will go in the living room," Sal said. "Sofa frame, the lamp, the bookcase, the door casing. They can search that room with a meter, and they will not find them, because they are not transmitting. They are recording locally and buffering to Victor's box over your neighbor's network. He worked for 3 hours. The sound of a socket wrench and small bolts going home is the sound I have fallen asleep to my entire life. And that night it was the sound of a machine being built to do exactly one job." Victor looked at me across the bench when it was done, and there was something in his face that had not been there earlier. "Walter," he said, "this plan requires you to be alone in a room with 2 people who intend to kill you. I have run these. They go wrong." I looked down at my hands, 51 years of black in the creases. I said, "Victor, I am 68 years old. My wife is dead, son is in hiding. There is nothing left in my life that a person can take from me except the truth about what happened to Margaret Grady. And that is the one thing I am not going to let them have. I will be the bait. You bring the net." Sal put his hand on my shoulder and gripped it hard enough to hurt. The next morning came up cold and bright, for the first time in 10 days. The sun came through the kitchen window at that low November angle that makes everything look like it is behind glass. At 9:10, I called Dr. Nolan Whitfield's private line. I let my voice do what an old man's voice does. Thin, broken in the middle, short of air. "Dr. Whitfield, my chest is tight. I cannot get a full breath." I did not know who else to call. There was 1 second of silence on that line. 1, and in it I could hear a man's whole mind moving. "Mr. Grady," he said, and his voice was warm as a blanket, "stay exactly where you are. Do not call anyone else. You will only get yourself worked up. I will bring what you need directly to the house." He hung up. He had taken it. I lay down on the old sofa in the living room, the one Margaret picked out in 2004 and refused to replace, and I put my head back against the cushion and closed my eyes. 18 minutes later, the doorbell rang. It was unlocked. I heard the door open, and I heard quick footsteps come across my floor. I kept my eyes shut, and I made my breathing shallow and ragged. The footsteps stopped beside the sofa. I smelled his aftershave, expensive and cold. His fingers found my wrist. Ice cold, precise, a professional's touch. He was taking my pulse, and there was a small sound in his throat that I can only describe as satisfaction. Then his phone came out, buttons. A pause. "Renee, I am at the old man's house." A tap on the arm of the sofa, casual, a man idling. Pulse is thready. He is nearly gone on his own. He is not a threat. He does not know what he has been drinking. I lay perfectly still. Everything inside me was a cable stretched to the last thread. Her voice came through the earpiece loud enough for me to catch every word, because he had it turned up. Because he was a man who had never once considered that a room could be listening. "Get it done today. I do not want him breathing when that money moves. Make it a cardiac event, same as the mother 4 years ago." He laughed under his breath. "Do not worry. I brought a stronger preparation. His heart stops inside 12 hours, and there is nothing in the blood to find." He ended the call. I heard the zipper of a medical bag. I heard the small dry snap of a plastic cap coming off a syringe. Every one of Sal's 4 microphones took it. All of it. BAFF, time-stamped, mirrored to a laptop in a gray sedan, 1,100 feet away where Victor Reyes and Frank Boone were sitting with headphones on. He lifted my arm. I opened my eyes. He came off that sofa like a man who had touched a live wire. The syringe went behind his back before he was fully upright. I sat up slowly. I straightened my collar. My hands did not shake at all. "Dr. Whitfield," I said. That was fast. He got a smile onto his face, and it did not fit, Mr. Grady. "You are awake. You appeared unresponsive. I was preparing to administer a cardiac support agent." "Cardiac support," I said. I raised one hand and pointed at his bag. "Or the same preparation you gave my wife 4 years ago." Every particle of color left that man's face. I have watched an engine block crack from a cold start, and it happened faster than that. He backed toward the door with his eyes going everywhere at once, and he said, "You are confused, old man. You do not know what you are saying." And then he turned and went out of my house at a dead run and left the door standing open. I did not follow him. I did not need to. I stood up in the middle of my own living room and brushed off my shirt and looked at Margaret's china cabinet. Fear is the most useful tool there is if you know what to do with it. A frightened animal does not think. A frightened animal moves, and it moves in a straight line, and you do not have to chase it at all. You only have to know where the line ends and stand there. My phone buzzed on the table. Recording is clean. Both voices. "Stay in the house." Then I went into the kitchen and did the thing Victor had insisted on, twice in that shop, until I repeated it back to him word for word. I took down the container of activated charcoal Sal had bought at the pharmacy on Ridge Road, and I mixed a dose in a glass of water, and I drank the whole thing down. It tastes like chalk and ashes, and it is not a cure for anything. It buys minutes. Victor's exact words were, "It is not protection, Walter. It is a head start. And if you swallow anything tonight, you will have swallowed it for a reason." Then I called Rosa and told her to stay away from that house. Then I sat down in Margaret's chair by the window, which I had not sat in one time in 4 years, and I waited for the sun to go down. They came at 9:40, the bell rang. I opened the door. Renee stood on my porch in an elegant black coat with a gift basket over her forearm. A bottle of wine, a tin of Earl Grey tea. She had brought Earl Grey tea into my house. Behind her, one step back and to the right, stood Nolan Whitfield with his right hand pushed deep in his coat pocket. She gave me her very best smile. It was radiant. It was the smile she used at Christmas, at Margaret's funeral, at my son's funeral 6 days after that. "Dad," she said, "Nolan told me you had a scare this morning. I could not stand the thought of you out here alone." I looked at her for perhaps 3 seconds. 40 years of marriage, 35 years of a son. And the woman who ended both of them was standing on my welcome mat holding a basket, wearing my mother-in-law's smile. I stepped back and pulled the door wide. "Come in," I said. "It is cold out." She swept into my living room and her perfume followed her like weather. She set the basket on the table where Margaret used to keep her puzzle. "Dad, you look exhausted," she said. "Let me put the kettle on. This blend is wonderful for the nerves." She went into my kitchen. I heard the tap run, and the burner tick and the sound of a spoon against porcelain, and I sat down on the sofa with my hands on my knees. Whitfield stood against the wall by the bookcase with his arms folded and his eyes never once leaving me. Renee came back, carrying 2 cups. She set one in front of me on Margaret's coaster. "Drink it while it is hot, Dad. It will settle you, and you will sleep like a stone." I looked at the steam coming off that cup. Bergamot. The whole room smelled of bergamot, the way our sunroom smelled every afternoon for the last 8 months of my wife's life. Under it, faint, almost nothing, was a bitterness that did not belong. That is what she smelled. Sitting in her chair, going blind, with her hands going numb, my wife smelled exactly this and drank it and said thank you. I picked up the cup. I raised it to my lips. They both stopped breathing. I have never in my life seen 2 people want something so badly. There was an excitement in their faces that had nothing human in it, at all. I took a long swallow and set the cup down. I waited about 60 seconds. Then I put my hand to my temple. "My head," I said, and let the words come apart in my mouth. "Why is everything?" I went forward onto the table. The cup went off the edge and broke on the floor, and the tea went across the boards. I lay there with my eyes not quite closed and every nerve I own wide open. Renee let out a breath. A long one, and the pretense came off her the way a mask comes off all at once, and what was underneath it was flat and quick and cold. "That is done," she said. "The old fool is down." Whitfield came over and nudged my leg with the toe of his shoe. "That dose with alcohol in the system stops the heart in under 4 hours. They will call it a stroke brought on by grief. 68 years old, buried his wife and his son inside 4 years. Nobody orders a workup on that. Nobody ever orders a workup on that. Renee laughed. I have heard a lot of sounds in 51 years in shops. That laugh in my dead wife's living room is the one I will hear on my last day. 4.8 million, she said. The house, the patents, all of it, and nobody left to sign a single objection. He should have gone out 4 years ago with her. Whitfield said, I will give you this. The plan was flawless from the beginning. The tea, the accident, all of it. Not one person ever looked twice. Because they never do, Renee said. People like them work their whole lives and they die owning a truck. We were not built for that. There it was. Both of them. Their own voices in my house, unprompted, with a man in the room who had consented to be recorded under the laws of the state of Ohio. Margaret's murder and my son's staged death, said out loud in complete sentences, by the two people who did it. 4 microphones took every syllable of it. Then the sirens came up the street. Red and blue light came through the blinds and swept across my ceiling. Renee froze in the middle of my living room floor, with her cup still in her hand. What is that? She said. Nolan, what is that? The front door came in off the latch. Frank Boone came through it first with his weapon up and 4 officers behind him, and the room was full of light and shouting. Police, hands, let me see your hands. Whitfield went for the pocket of his coat, and 2 officers put him on the floor of my living room so hard the china rattled in Margaret's cabinet. The handcuffs closed with that flat metal sound. I sat up, I brushed the tea off my sleeve and stood. Renee stared at me, all the color was gone out of her face. Her red mouth was moving before any sound came out of it. You are fine. How are you fine? I looked her in the eye. I had waited 4 years for that, and I did not hurry. I am a mechanic, Renee, I said. I have spent my whole life finding the broken part and taking it out. Frank Boone held up Victor's recorder. Renee Ashford, he said, your full statement regarding the poisoning of Margaret Grady and the staging of Nathan Grady's death has been recorded, along with the attempt made in this room in the last 4 minutes. Turn around, and then she ran. I do not think she decided to. I think the animal in her simply took the wheel. She shoved a young officer into my end table and went straight down my back hall and out the kitchen door into the dark. The keys to the gray SUV were hanging on the hook by that door, where they had hung for 6 days, where they had hung on that same nail since Nathan was in high school. She took them. Of course she took them. It was the vehicle closest to the door. She got in and cranked it, and the engine came up on the first turn, because I had changed the oil in it myself on Sunday, and she put her foot flat on the floor. The doors locked, not the ordinary click of a door lock at speed. All 4 at once hard, and then the sound of the child locks throwing on the rear. The navigation screen came up bright red in her face. I did not see it happen. I have watched the recovered footage from the cabin camera perhaps 20 times since, and I will not watch it again. There was 1 line of text on that screen. It is old, just like you. Every input on that vehicle went dead in her hands. The wheel would not answer. The accelerator did nothing. Somewhere out beyond the county line, my son, who had spent 3 months in the wiring of that truck, preparing for a night he prayed would never come, brought it up on his own screen and took the helm. The SUV backed itself out of my driveway with perfect care. It came about in the street, and then it drove away at exactly the posted speed limit with Renee Ashford screaming inside it and beating both hands on a window that did not care, north on Wexford, west on Denison, and it signaled every turn. It came to a full and complete stop in front of the 2nd District Station House, put itself in park, and unlocked the doors for the 4 officers standing on the steps. Frank Boone told me later that in 31 years of police work, it was the only arrest he had ever seen deliver itself. I went out and stood on my porch. The rain had stopped. It had been raining on this city for 11 days, and it stopped that night, and the clouds were pulling apart, and there was 1 hard bright star over the roofline across the street. Victor Reyes came up the steps and stood beside me, and neither of us said anything for a while. Then he took out his phone and handed it to me. There was a call connected on it. The location line at the top read a name I knew as well as my own. Petrosky Auto Repair. I put it to my ear. Dad, that was all he could get out. Just that. I stood on my porch in the cold with my son's voice in my ear, and the first tear I had shed in 6 days went down the side of my face and I did not wipe it away. It is over, Nathan said. I know, son, I said. Come home. The first light of a November morning came up over Cleveland and cut the fog into strips. I drove the black Ford Explorer west out of the city, with the windows down and the cold pouring in, and the smell of oil and grease inside that cabin was the most peaceful thing I have ever breathed. I parked in front of Sal's shop. The iron sign's rusting there since 1995, and Sal will not let me repaint it. Inside, the sun was coming through the dirty windows in long bars, and you could see the metal dust turning in the light. A man was bent over the far bench with his back to the door, broad shoulders, hair that has never once in 35 years done what he wanted it to, hands black to the wrist. Nathan turned around. Neither of us said anything for a moment. Grief and endurance and a happiness so large it was difficult to stand up under, all arrived at once in the middle of that shop floor. Then he crossed the bay, and I put my arms around my son and held on, and I did not care who saw it. "I am sorry, Dad," he said into my shoulder. "I put you through the worst 6 days of your life." I patted his back with a hand that has never been clean since 1973. "You did right," I said. "Your mother can rest now." We sat down at that bench together, the two of us, and Sal put coffee in front of us and went away and left us alone. And because neither of us knew what to say, we did what the Grady men have always done instead of talking, which is that we pulled an old 3-speed off the shelf and took it down to the last bearing and put it back together, and the sound of metal on metal went up into the rafters all morning. It was the sound of something being rebuilt. Here is what happened afterward, because you deserve the whole of it, and not just the good part. Nolan Whitfield was indicted on aggravated murder, attempted aggravated murder, conspiracy, tampering with records, and 11 federal counts arising out of the insurance filing. He surrendered his license within the month. He is serving life without the possibility of parole at a state institution in Ross County. He has never once in any proceeding expressed regret for Margaret. He expressed a great deal of regret about the sentence. Renee Ashford went to trial. Her attorneys were very good, and they tried exactly what Victor Reyes said they would try, which was that she was a young woman manipulated by an older man with medical knowledge. It did not survive first contact with her own recorded voice, and it did not survive Margaret's journal, and it did not survive the 4 glass vials still sitting untouched in a compartment behind a painting in her own house with her fingerprints on 2 of them and my wife's toxicology profile, matching what was in them. The jury was out for 6 hours. She is serving life without parole at the State Reformatory for Women in Marysville. She was 34 years old. My son did not walk away clean, and I want to say that plainly, because I am not going to tell you a story where the good people get to break the law for good reasons, and nothing happens. Nathan was charged with gross abuse of a corpse and falsification. He cooperated completely from the first hour. The court weighed what he had built and what it prevented, and gave him 5 years of probation, 400 hours of community service, and a felony record he will carry to his grave. He says it is the cheapest thing he ever bought. And Rosa Delgado stood up in a courtroom in front of the woman who had fired her and told 12 strangers about 2 cups of tea that went into a pantry 4 years ago. Her voice shook the whole time. She never stopped. She works for us now. Nathan sold that house on the hill inside a year and could not get rid of it fast enough. Margaret's death certificate was amended. Where it used to say natural causes, it says homicide. That is the piece nobody understands until it happens to them. That amendment is 1 line of type on 1 page in a county office, and almost nobody on this earth will ever read it. It is the thing I fought for. It is the only thing I ever wanted. I am 69 now. I still open the shop 3 days a week because Sal cannot lift what he used to, and neither can I, and between us we make about 1 whole mechanic. I have had a long time in a quiet house to think about what any of this is worth to somebody who is not me. So let me set down the things I actually learned, 'cause I would trade the whole story to have known them 4 years earlier. The first one is the hardest, and it is this. The danger to an older person almost never arrives as a stranger. In this country, the overwhelming majority of financial exploitation and abuse of the elderly is committed by family members and by the people we have invited close enough to make the tea. It is not a man in a mask. It is somebody with a key to the house. We spend our lives teaching our children to be afraid of strangers, and then we get old and we hand our checkbook and our pill organizer and our front door code to the person we least want to suspect, and we call that love. It is not love. Love and oversight are not opposites, and any person who becomes angry when you ask a reasonable question about your own money has told you something you should write down. The second is about the machine, and I mean this literally. Nothing breaks all at once. Margaret got tired, and I said she was 62. Her hands went numb, and I said it was her circulation. Her eyes got worse, and we bought stronger glasses. Every one of those readings was reasonable on its own. That is exactly how a catastrophic failure hides, in a series of individually reasonable explanations. If you find yourself explaining away the fourth small thing in a row about a person you love, stop explaining and start writing dates in a notebook. You are not being disloyal. You are collecting data, and if you are wrong, no harm comes to anybody, and if you are right, you have just saved a life. The third thing is for the people around the Rosas of the world, and for the Rosas themselves. Rosa Delgado saw something strange in a kitchen 4 years ago and said nothing, and I want to be very clear about where I put that. Not on her. She was a woman with no power in that house and everything to lose. And the entire architecture of that situation was built by somebody else specifically, so that people like her would keep quiet. Silence is almost always cheaper than speech, and the people who plan these things count on exactly that. And the answer is not to shame the person who stayed quiet. It is to build lives and workplaces and families where the price of speaking is lower. Ask the housekeeper, ask the aide, ask the neighbor. They see everything and nobody ever asks them. The fourth is about money, and it is dull, and it is the one that would actually have prevented all of it. Know what policies exist on your life and on the lives of the people you love. An insurable interest is a legal doctrine, but it is also a moral question, and it is worth asking out loud who profits if I die on a Tuesday. Keep your own attorney, not the family attorney. Keep your own physician. When somebody offers to take all of it off your hands, understand that convenience and control come out of the same faucet. And the last one is about revenge, since that is the word people use for stories like this one. I had it in my hands. In that warehouse in Parma, with my wife's voice still in the air, I could have done it, and there is a version of that night where I did. What I have learned is that the kind of revenge you take with your hands is not justice. It is just grief in a hurry. It feels like the end of the story, and it is actually the beginning of a worse one, and the person you hurt gets to become a victim, and the person you were avenging disappears completely. I did not want Renee Ashford to suffer. I wanted somebody official to say my wife's name out loud in a room with a flag in it. I wanted a stranger in a county office to change one word on one certificate. That is not softness. Patience is not weakness, and restraint is not surrender. Restraint is what you use when you have decided that the outcome matters more than the feeling. It is the single hardest thing a human being can do, and it is the only thing that actually works. Margaret is buried at Riverside next to a stone that is finally telling the truth. Nathan and I put flowers there together on her birthday. He brings his daughter now. She is 2, and she is loud, and she has her grandmother's laugh, the one that comes out all at once like something startled out of a hedge. The machine was badly damaged. The most important gear in it survived. Life runs on honesty and on decency, and the people who strip the teeth off those gears for their own gain will be caught in the works eventually. Every time, without exception, though it may take 4 years and it may take 40. And pay attention to the small things. Please. Sometimes the people who love you most cannot say what is happening to them out loud. Sometimes all they can do is leave a trail, and trust that somebody who loves them will care enough to follow it. If this story meant something to you, do me one small kindness. Subscribe to my channel and leave a comment telling me the name of someone in your life you are going to call this week, just to ask how they really are. It costs nothing, and it means more than you know, and there are more stories like this one coming. This story is a work of dramatized fiction. It was written by a human being, sitting at a desk, thinking about his own parents. The names, the characters, and the events are invented, and any resemblance to real persons living or dead is coincidental. What is not invented is the shape of it. Elder financial abuse and exploitation by family members are real. They are common, and they are chronically underreported. And I wrote this because I would rather one person watch it and pick up the phone and call their mother than have 1,000 people call it entertaining. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. Go call somebody.